Just because you want your employees to love their job doesn't mean that the job has to be easy. Finding the balance between accountability and joy is really where the magic is. And to create this, your employees will do their best work when they have psychologically safe workplaces that also have accountability. Well, Jonathan Bennett, our guest today, has grown and scaled a couple of businesses, and he knows exactly how to do this. Jonathan Bennett, welcome to How I Turn the Corner.
It's great to be here, Kendra. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've talked with a number of guests over the years about psychological safety. And as I was going back through the archives, I realized it's never really been defined. So, do you mind by kind of starting us off by just what is the definition of psychological safety?
Yeah, well, there's a seminal book by Amy Emerson, which I just encourage everybody to read if this is a new topic and a new kind of term for you. And it's maybe 7 years old or so off the top of my head. The kind of case she presents is that when you can show up to work and there's no fear of reprisals, you feel open to share ideas, you are allowed to make mistakes, and that it's an environment where you can learn and grow. It's psychologically safe.
And what is the book? Just so our listeners
I,
have it.
I actually, like, I have it not because I knew you were going to ask me that question, but I happen to have it right here. So it's The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson.
Great, excellent. Yeah, and I'd say that so that's the definition. Thank you for that. And really, what are some of the behaviors that a psychologically safe organization is experiencing? Like, what are some of the things that happen?
Yeah, well, I think we all can kind of relate to the boss that storms in, dumps a big bunch of work on us, gives us half the information we need to be successful. We flail around for a while, try do our best, try not let the person down, deliver the work as close to the deadline, but probably we don't make it because we're crushed under all of the other things that we've been asked to do. They're frustrated because we didn't nail it, and PS, we're a little late. So that's okay. They swoop in and they save the day. And they take the work back away from us and they complete it themselves. When that first starts, it leaves us feeling a bit, confused. But after a while, we sort of get trained. We sort of realize that actually we just have to do half the job around here, and it's okay because they come in and they do it their way anyway. So there's a limit to how hard we can try, right? So these sorts of environments where I mean, obviously on a basic level, it's poor delegation, but creating environments where you're doing work with your employees, where you're building agreements with your team, and you're passing out the work, and how we get the work done is really co-created or collaborative. These are environments that and behaviors that leaders have, to your question, that create psychologically safe environments. And I think it's important to remember that, when we come to work, things may be good for us today, or may be good for us this month, or even this year, but it's not a static thing. Psychologically safe work environments are dynamic and they're always moving. And so we feel like things are going great. And, the last thing that you should be doing as a leader is saying, right, I've nailed it. Like, we're good here. Everything's safe. The culture's great. And then put your feet up, because humans are humans and they tend to be different, and they tend to go through things in their personal life, and they show up to work in different states of mind with different needs and different wants in a pretty ongoing way, which means that it's something that you've always got to keep your eye on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think some other behaviors for a psychologically unsafe environment are also where someone gets the work dumped on them, like you said, for that example, does the best they can, and then the leader turns around and says, "This was crap. This was awful," and really reprimands them, and maybe even writes them up or even fires them. And that environment then makes it so that now everybody's afraid, right? Everyone is now on edge, wondering when is the next shoe going to drop for me, possibly. And I think when you're living in that kind of environment, that kind of a stressful environment, you're not going to be able to look for possibility and look for opportunity because you're protecting yourself. You're in that CYA kind of situation. So, I mean, you want to elaborate any more on that?
Yeah, it's just a creativity killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we're in psychologically unsafe environments, we're not going to take risks. The last thing we're going to have is a good idea because it's going to get shot down. Somebody else is going to steal it. Like these workplaces, at worst they're toxic, but more often than not, they're kind of in the middle. They're just sort of safe some days and unsafe other days. And we live in this world that kind of ebbs and flows. And there's just not a lot of attention to being paid to the kinds of things we're talking about. And so, if you're a leader and you're listening to this and you're wondering, how do I do more to create safety? I just sort of begin with curiosity. Start by asking, how are folks feeling? How do you know that they're feeling? Is it that, they're telling you they're fine? What are you observing? And is there a gap between what you're observing and what they're telling you? These are ways that you can kind of get plugged into the culture. And, I just go back to doing work with people is really important. You don't want to do it to them and you don't want to do it for them. Building agreements with people, doing work together, allowing people creativity and allowing them to have accountability, and I imagine we'll get to that as well, is a super important ingredient in creating a safe work environment for folks.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's slowly dive into accountability because I think there's a couple areas that can get misconstrued also with this. And so I have been and I've seen in some of my clients organizations where the leader, the CEO or the executive director is doing a great job. They're creating that environment where it should be safe, but then they have a toxic leader on the team that is doing a great job managing up, and the CEO doesn't see it, but all
Mm.
the staff see it. So, as we start talking about accountability, what does a CEO do in that situation when they finally get wind of this maybe toxic leader who isn't really carrying the bag of a psychologically safe organization?
Yeah, that's a really all too common example. People are really good. They get good at managing up. They get good at pleasing the person, the one person in the organization that they feel like they need to please, but are brutal to everybody else that is alongside them and below them. So I think if you're the CEO in that case, you're looking for more than one source of information. So, and that's true for all the things in your life. But we get, really sort of overconfident in folks that report to us, especially if they're blowing smoke in our general direction, right? Like we get to feel like like it feels good. You get a dopamine hit. People telling you you're great, and that's how they're managing up to you, and you start to really like and trust them. And at some point, you get some information. Maybe it's through an anonymous survey. Maybe there's a consultant that comes in, and there's this other truth going on for folks that are a layer down and or alongside this person. And it can be quite shocking to you because you're like, where have I been? And first you can't believe it, and you look for evidence to suggest that this evidence is wrong, but eventually you come to the place. And it is a leadership moment, taking action, moving the person, letting the person go, performance managing them, whatever the circumstances may dictate, is pretty essential because everyone's watching. Because now they know and what are you going to do about it? And if you're not going to do anything about it, then you're pretty much siding with them, and they've got all the answers they need, and they'll start looking at LinkedIn.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that kind of turnover is, I think, the most expensive kind of turnover because it's an employee that wants to be there, wants to do good work, but is just not being managed properly. And they're now having to find another job, but really wants to stay there versus the employee that was just really a bad hire or
Yeah,
one who doesn't want to be there at all. You want them out anyway.
totally.
Yeah. So then let's talk more then about accountability in a more
Hmm,
positive way. So
sure.
so for example, I think I mean, I can say this, and then the truth is really going to come from my team, right? But I work really hard to create an environment that is psychologically safe. I personally don't like the feeling of being inauthentic. I don't like getting upset with people and being angry with people. And I also deeply feel the need to get results. And so because of that, I feel like we have a really good environment of getting accountability. We hold
Mm.
each other accountable, not just me. And we just have this great environment. Again, like I can say that all day long. It's my team that's got to validate that. But what are some of your suggestions for building more accountability into an environment that is, has a decent amount of psychological safety already?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a little story. I had a client, a year or two ago, and they called me up and they said, Jonathan, would you come and deliver a workshop? And I said, yeah, sure. And they said, okay, so like we canvassed the team. And so the frontline staff, they'd really like to hear you speak about psychological safety. And the management team, we'd like you to talk about accountability. And I'm like, oh, what's going on there? It just piques the curiosity. Um, it was a gift to me though, because the more I dug in, I realized like we're talking about the same thing essentially. I think there's kind of three layers to accountability. The first is accountability to myself, the quality of my work, the quality of what I put into relationships, how accountable I am to following up and following through on the things that matter to me and the people directly around me is, that's on me. And that should be first and foremost with all of us in all areas of life, but for sure at work. The second is accountability to the team that I'm on, including my boss. I have an accountability to my colleagues to follow through and do the things that I say I'm going to do, and holding them accountable for the things that they're going to do. And that's super important. The final one is, I think, the last to come, and the last one that people often really think about, maybe not until they get a little further up the organization, which is accountability to the organization itself. And that comes when you become a CEO, or maybe you're on the board of directors. There's this thing called fiduciary duty, right? You have this like accountability to the corporation, to the organization as a whole. But really, on some level, we all have some accountability to the place that we work, to living the values, pursuing the mission and the purpose of the organization or the company that we work, assuming we've got an articulated mission that is, and some stated values. But often organizations and companies do. So those three levels, I think, are really important, and they're not always equal in terms of the weighting that happens for folks. They begin often with themselves, and it next moves out to the team. And it's not really until you've got the highest level of oversight for an organization that you start to really think broadly about it. But it's in my experience that organizations that have the deepest levels of accountability are also the most psychologically safe. And when I go there, even at the front line, even fairly new hires, people are all in. They really understand the values and the culture and the brand, and they are advocates and champions for that, even when they're not at work. That's when I know that they're deeply accountable, and almost certainly it's going to be a psychologically safe work environment as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, I think that's what we experience here. Is that, I mean, I've just been it's been so eye-opening to me over the last couple of months because we've had, when you have someone join the team and then they're not maybe performing at the level that you had hoped them to perform, it's really nice as a leader to not be the only one that's noticing that and the only one that's having to make a decision around what to do with this person. When the
Yeah.
whole team is feeling the accountability to each other and they're feeling safe enough to actually bring it up,
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing that happens. And I feel like it just creates more ease for the leader too.
Yeah. Uh, I was I was once, so that my previous company that I founded and scaled, I was on a trip, and I was in Ottawa, and I was at a lunch meeting. And right before the lunch meeting started, I got a series of texts from somebody, back at the ranch. And they were like, asking me like kind of a series of kind of weird questions. And I wasn't sure the context, and I was kind of waiting and trying to get into this, lunch meeting, which was sort of important in my head. And I was quite distracted. And eventually, in the middle of the meeting, I said, "Just excuse me. I have to kind of look back on this thing that started at work." And so I went back and I like texted again, and it turned out everything was okay. Somebody had become sick and had to look after their kid or something, and so it's okay. Somebody else subbed in, and somebody else was subbing in for that person, and a whole series of things that happened, and it was all okay. And so I telling this colleague across the table from me, oh, sorry, it was just a big thing and people fixed it and the thing. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you shouldn't just glaze over this. You have like a self-organizing, self-correcting team. Like that's kind of the high. It doesn't actually get much better than that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you should think, you're like, you should remember this moment because, you know, it may not stay this good either.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated him just calling that out for something that to me in that moment felt a bit normal. Well, it turns out actually it was, one of the high points in the journey of that company. That particular group of people, they were so all in and so deeply connected to one another. Of course, somebody would step in and, when the kid was sick and somebody else would switch it out and somebody else would brief somebody else in the car, they would just fix all of that. And it wasn't that they didn't tell me, but they didn't need my approval. And they just knew how to problem solve, and they knew their boundaries and the extent to which they could do those things, with pre-approval.
Mm-hmm.
And I do look back on that moment as I'm just really glad that he flagged that for me.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think we're seeing that's agency. That right? That's when you've given them safety,
Yeah.
and there's probably a lot of other ingredients in there too, to actually create an environment where they have agency.
Yes.
I think that is just amazing. And I love the idea of a self-correcting organization too. It's truly then more of an ecosystem, right? Where
Yeah.
there's not this one person in charge that's going to command and control and say this is how it's going to be, but it's
Yeah.
an ecosystem where the leader is part of the ecosystem, part of setting the tone and maybe creating the conditions. But
Yeah.
then all these other things happen tangentially, which is amazing.
Mhm.
Well, so now let's switch gears a little bit then and talk
Mm.
about the organization that might be a little bit cynical about this whole idea. So you mentioned in the beginning that uh, ideas nobody's going to be thinking of a brilliant idea while they're in a place of fear. Can we go though to the level of like frontline workers? So people who have an enormous amount of stress outside of the work environment. What do we do in that situation when it comes to psychological safety? So I'm going to give more context. Let's
Sure.
say you have a frontline worker team that they're all basically living in poverty. They're not making ends meet. They're struggling with getting kids to the right spot. They're maybe not even they might be living in a food poverty environment.
Mhm.
Lots and lots of external stresses coming at them all the time. Now they come into a work environment where perhaps it is a great environment, but how can they possibly thrive when that's their life, when that's the situation? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, I mean, as the founder of a B Corp, I mean, begin by paying a living wage, folks.
Mhm.
If you care about your people, you should find out what a living wage is in your area, and you should be paying for that. It'll pay itself back in dividends, in loyalty, in reduced turnover costs. I mean, all the things. Uh, but I mean, that's not really what your question is getting at. I think actually a lot of structure is actually fairly helpful. I am a believer in strong processes and systems. I think people mostly do want to do a good job, and they do want to not hide things, and they do want to not keep secrets, and they do want to know that they can get support and help. And so much of what we do, especially in frontline work, is kind of 2/3 to 3/4 kind of spelled out, but there's this stuff that just if you've never done it before, you couldn't know, and until you've been through a full year's cycle, you won't pick it all up. And we lose most of the people in the first 6 months. I'm on the board of directors of a company that has a big frontline work at a retail level. And that's really the secret sauce, is that if we can get them over the 6 month mark, we get them to 2 years, they're there forever. But if we can get past 6 months, we've got a fighting chance. And so onboarding is key. Lots of structure, lots of rules, and tons of training. And that is the kind of thing that makes people want to come to work, because they know what it looks like to do a good job. And if you create a psychologically safe place and you can pay people as well as you can, then work becomes a place that they can actually tune out the difficulties that's going on. at home, and it becomes a place where things are actually stable, unlike the chaos that can be true in your life. And so, creating that environment for people is a gift. And I think that they're the ways that you can kind of start to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really big challenge, and I think for our listeners too, paying attention to this interview. Upcoming, we'll have another interview with a guy who's specifically addressing this issue,
Mm.
and so that this kind of ties in really nicely, I think, to psychological safety as well. So just be on
Nice.
standby for that one. It'll come out here in the next couple of weeks with Mark Peters. But I just feel like it can be a little bit daunting to create that kind of an environment when the employee isn't already bringing their best selves into work.
Yeah, it is daunting. I think that there are some boundaries that we need to have as employers. We're not social workers, and we're not family. So what can we do, and what is reasonable? And I think that creating safety by creating structure is what is within our purview. Can we have EAP? Sure. If we've got lots of margin and lots of money, can we add in extra supports and healthcare benefits and other stuff like that? Absolutely. I mean, that's going to help with retention and is going to help people keep their lives in order that they can come to work and do good work. But I think that I've seen also many extremely well-meaning companies cross that line where they become surrogate families, or they become the surrogate safety, like place of safety that's so vulnerable, and the enmeshment that happens from people's lives outside of work can become a negative thing. If their performance doesn't ultimately cut it and you do have to let them go, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll hang on to a poor performing person at the detriment of a great big, ripple effect across your team, because you've helped them through a really difficult thing outside of work. And these are gray areas, and they're really, really complicated. I'm not saying don't be empathetic. I'm certainly not saying don't, create grace and space for people. I'm a strong believer in all of that. But know when you're doing it and know where the boundaries are, because if you're the only place that that person can get what they need in terms of emotional support, then you really don't have an employment relationship. You've got something else, and that could create all kinds of problems for you. So, just keep your eye on it, and I think just stay on the right side of the line for you
Hmm.
as best you can.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, excellent, Jonathan. Well, I think that's a really perfect place for us to end the interview. So I really appreciate your insights into all of this. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It is my absolute pleasure, Kendra. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining How I Turned the Corner.
Cheers.
Cheers.